Hello there, and welcome to A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. And continuing my loose theme of the month, I'm covering another film to celebrate Pride Month. So I did say that I'd probably have maybe two queer cinema films a week, which is broadly where it seems to be going in terms of my schedule. And of course, the second one of this last week being the not too long ago released Strangelove, which is a coming of age teen coming out, I suppose, story. And it's interesting because I don't know if, on one level, I suppose this kind of narrative is still relatively new. I myself hadn't seen merging the sort of queer cinema with the coming of age teen comedy until Dear Simon, which I keep saying Dear Simon, it's becoming a terrible habit. Love, Simon, which of course was 2 years ago. But those narratives have been around over the last couple of years, but it's only in the mainstream, I'd say, since maybe perhaps Call Me By Your Name, although I don't really categorise it as quite in the same category of coming of age. Films like Strangelove are much more in the traditional high school American modern experience films. And watching this, to begin with, I really got that Mean Girls style to it. You know, that, of course, the character of Alex opens with discussing his love of animals and using that to compare them to different types of high school students. And that's very similar to, of course, the Mean Girls opening with Lindsay Lohan's character. And it does have that quirky, sort of modern, slightly humorous, slightly dramatic high school experience, which is quite popular in cinema, but, of course, in this case, doing it through the experience of a young guy who is discovering his sexuality as someone who believed himself to be straight, and then over the course of the film discovers that he is in fact gay. So I'm going to do the same disclaimer that I did for the last video for Priscilla, which is, as a cis heterosexual male, my opinions on this may in fact not matter. Shock of shocks. I obviously can talk about it in terms of cinema history, in terms of cinema trends, but when it comes to the portrayal of LGBTQ plus characters, and of course that experience, and if I have criticisms of the way it's portrayed, it's from the perspective of someone who probably doesn't know enough and probably shouldn't be throwing their heteronormative opinions at a culture that is still growing and changing and evolving over the decades. But here we are. And so, like I say, I'm going to discuss it in terms of cinema tropes and things that I enjoyed and things that frustrated me. But I've said the caveat. I'm worried I'm going to have to say it for every video of this month's theme. I hope not, but it's because it will become relevant over the course of the discussion. So, as I say, it opens with the character. We always get this extended prologue section where like I say, the character introduces himself, he introduces his friends, the culture of the high school, and his, we're going to put in inverted commas, love interest, which is this girl named Claire. And we see them meet cute, we see them slowly develop a friendship, that then blossoms into a romance in a very natural, organic way, and then the film sort of officially opens with them as a couple. And I really do like that, because, and this again shows my cultural biases and expectations. Now, I went in knowing this was a film about a guy coming out, And so when I watched when the film opens and the character presents as straight, I immediately went, no, I don't believe it. Like, there's just certain traits and characteristics and mannerisms that he has that suggested to me early on, oh well, it's going to be a Kurt from Glee situation where it's just going to be really transparent. And I was very, very quickly proven wrong. This is much more in the Dear Simon category where... See, keeps happening. The Love Simon category of film where, seeing him amongst his friends and seeing him with his girlfriend, this is a character who, does seem straight from the outset. In fact, he and Claire do genuinely have really good chemistry. You genuinely believe them as a couple, and you believe them as friends. That these are two actors and characters who just have this nice, relaxed, natural relationship. And so when you get into sort of the meat of the film, there's almost a sense of sadness knowing that this character is going to go on this journey, and it's going to, obviously the dilemma will be over the fact that it will degrade his existing, it will destroy the relationship that he has, and it's a question of will it preserve the friendship that he has with her. And what I like about it, and for the majority of the film, what I really liked about it is it explores the idea of a character who is trying to discover themselves but isn't 100% sure about everything. We have the arc of a guy who, as I say, presents as straight at the beginning and believes he's straight, has a girlfriend. They are having issues in terms of intimacy on some level, to the extent where they seem to be physically intimate except for sex, and of course they're having sex is a major plot point. You see him sort of like I say, with his friends, and there is this sense where instead of having overtly homophobic themes to it, which if it was say an 80s, 90s, early 90s film would have been the way to go. What I like about this is it's not that the characters are ostensibly homophobic, but it comes from a culture where people still use coded language. When discussing, the intimacy problems that Alex and Claire have with his friends immediately go, sort of accuse him of being gay, which is something that I definitely relate to. I definitely, being a child of the 90s, becoming a teenager in the noughties, and this is something that, of course, historically is problematic, but it just was how things were, and we needed to grow past that, where we would use gay as a term for someone who, who sort of not even use the term. We sort of accuse someone who's sort of, discovering themselves as a person. We would use the term gay just to say, oh well, are you gay because you haven't gone further with your girlfriend, or or you don't seem to show any interest. And it was never. And what I like about this film is it's not meant aggressively, and yet there is a subtext to it. The fact that, if you use the term, it implies that there is something subnormal in that it's othering. That, you haven't had sex with your girlfriend, therefore you must be gay. And that there is something wrong with that. And I think it was obviously, when being a teenager and that sort of language was used, it was problematic at the time. Now that we're much more enlightened and much more sort of open to discussing the issues that we culturally have with the portrayal and discussion over coming out and LGBTQ plus issues, retrospectively, it is obvious now. It's like, yes, we should never have been using language like that, but that's what being a teenager is. And, and perhaps now it has changed, but the film portrays that kind of language, or uses that kind of language from, just casually, because that is how people speak and how people, to communicate with each other. And I think that's a really strong message, because that's a much more interesting portrayal of a character like Alex, who seems to not realise he is gay until, he has suggestions of it, but it feeds into a neurosis that he has as a person. And we see elements of that neurosis, slightly over-pressuring parents, almost being competitive with his girlfriend, over there, sort of the fact that she's got into Columbia and he's still waiting to hear back, and that neurosis is something that could affect someone regardless of their orientation. Now, as it happens, he is in fact gay, but the use of coded language to sort of express that can only hurt him as a person. So he then, of course, over the course of the film, is struggling to sort of come to terms with what is going on, and that, I suppose, is sort of relatable to anyone of any orientation or gender identity, where they are discovering themselves, and he can't work out why he's not as into his girlfriend sexually as he should be. And of course, he then goes through sort of the, oh, am I bi? And sort of goes through a section of the film with that in mind. And that kind of processing seems very contemporary. It shows a character who isn't sure of themselves. I mentioned earlier the Kurt from Glee, and I think, sort of representation of gay people in media, and I think, having observed this, I think it's a lot easier in terms of media and film and television portrayals of gay people to lean into stereotypes like that. And there are people who are, much more traditionally, obviously gay, or obviously into people of the, LGBTQ+. But at the same time, you have a character like Simon from Love, Simon, or a character like Alex from Alex Strangelove, who there's no external reason to believe that character, what they're to have a knowledge of their orientation. We live in a heteronormative society, so of course we instinctively think that a character who seems like a well-adjusted teenager, who is sort of just finding things out, but they present as straight, it's easy to fit into the mould that they are just straight. Because, again, it's normalisation. It creates that sense that, okay, we know what a gay person or a lesbian person or someone who's struggling with their gender looks like, or a bisexual person, and they have these traits. But that's very dated. That's a very dated model. And media representations still struggle with that as well. Whereas the idea that Alex is just an everyday teenager who then has to come to terms with his sexuality and realise himself. It's a strong arc, and again, it's a coming of age story that inexplicably hasn't really been represented particularly extensively in film. It exists, of course, but in the mainstream sense, it's still one that we don't have a lot of representation for. And particularly in the mould of Love, Simon, of Alex Strangelove. And I think that made it a really interesting film in that respect. And you have characters like his friend Delmar, who is much more the frustrating, hateful, the character who you don't hate, but he does things that are frustrating to the point where, or problematic. It's very similar to the character in Love, Simon, the one who, I forget his name, but there's a very similar character who isn't even a friend in that film, but that person who isn't the worst person in the world, but their actions have consequences on the people around them, particularly in Alex Strangelove, his best friend Elmar essentially subconsciously attacks any sense of non-heteronormative ideas of himself that Alex might have. And it's unfortunate because it's the same actor who plays the creep in 8th Grade that, of course, we watched last week. And I feel bad for that actor because he is playing significantly unlikable characters, and I hope he doesn't get pigeonholed, but he does do both those well. When he's playing a creepy guy who's hitting on a 14-year-old girl when he's 18, he did that very well in that film. And in this, where he plays the idiot friend who doesn't mean to do harm and yet is doing harm, he does that equally well. And he's the character who you want to see on screen, but you also love to hate. There's a particularly good sequence with him and a frog, but I won't go into too much detail because I think it's very funny and it is a nice out of nowhere sequence. I think the only issues with the film, I suppose, really feed into one of two or three things come into my mind where I go, oh, this didn't quite work. The first is I do think the ending does have to rush to get to the finish line. It gets to a certain denouement point, and then it resolves things, or has to resolve them in a way that I wish... It doesn't hurt the narrative, but it doesn't allow it to organically resolve things quite as naturally as it does for the first two acts. It feels very like... The way I describe it is that there is the point in the film where it feels like we've had a climax, and then as we're sort of resolving things, there are scenes that are missing from the film, and it feels like time is elapsing, but we are not seeing certain things being portrayed on screen, and I think that's frustrating. The other issue, I suppose, is, the fact that it discusses sort of the fluidity of sexuality, and it mentions things like bisexuality and poly and those sorts of things. And in 2021, I know on the one level we are advancing in terms of queer cinema, the fact that we are now exploring characters much more openly in this way, in a more mainstream context. And the film explores the idea of bisexuality, and the character sort of considers that. But, again, it does a thing which is still quite common in television and film, probably over the last 20-25 years. I mean, Christ, Buffy was accused of it way back when, which is bi erasure. The idea that, we are still very binary in terms of straight or gay. And although in this film, we see the mechanics of how a character like him can go from being in a relationship with a woman to realising he's gay, and the discovery that that this was never in doubt. The fact that he entertains the possibility of bisexuality, it's a shame that does get dismissed quite quickly. And I do think that that's, again, perhaps for other films to explore more deeply. The other thing I suppose I haven't mentioned is in relation to the chemistry he has with the actual the non-inverted commas love interest, the actual love interest, which is genuinely really good. And they don't have many scenes together because it's not really about that. But they genuinely do have quite good chemistry. And as I say, that works really well when you have a character like, or a relationship that Alex has with Claire, which, again, really good chemistry, and they work well together, and a character like Elliot, and again, they have really good chemistry, and that feeds into that uncertainty about his sexuality. So I think, I do think that that's portrayed very well, and I do think, when it gets to the ending, you do see why the character is in the dilemma that he's in, and why he's struggling to self-identify and, actualise. And I think, again, that's not something that we get to see a lot of. We do seem to see characters, in queer cinema, who, the quote-unquote, I always knew principle, where a character seems to have always known they were gay, and it was never in question, whereas this film, at least for the most part, explores the idea of someone who felt they were straight and then slowly over the course of the film self-actualizes to then realise that they are gay, and obviously has to sort of unpack that in relationship to the people around them. And I think that is it's a much more interesting film than ones, we in queer cinema we have seen a lot of characters who just, from the off presented and new. And I think, though as a representation of real life, it seems very inflexible in a world where we can present different experiences for different people. Sorry, again, heteronormative, perception on that, I don't know. Again, I can talk about it in terms of cinema. Perhaps I'm misspoken by talking about it in terms of representation, but that's the way I feel. I do feel like there is flexibility and different variations that we can, or of a spectrum of experiences that would be worth seeing in cinema. So I do think this is a good film. I don't quite think it's as good as Love, Simon, but I do think this is, again, there's no reason to put them up against each other. They're very different films in a lot of ways. And I think, we have hundreds of, high school coming-of-age stories about straight teens. So the fact there are two that are not, they don't need to be in competition. But yeah, very fun film. Anyway, thank you for joining me. If you like this video, please hit the like button, comment on the video and share it, because this will help me in the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell to get notifications of when new videos are uploaded. Follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I'm always tweeting about TV shows and movies, and I put new videos, or share new videos when they're put up on YouTube. Thank you for joining me. Take care.